If you ever wondered why diesel engines develop oil leaks, well, this is the reason right here. This is your crankcase blow-by hose right here. So the air that gets past the cylinders into the crankcase develops pressure, and it's an oily, sooty, gassy, filmy, gas. So you don't want to evacuate that into the surrounding air if you can avoid it. So what manufacturers have been trying to do is bury it back into the engine. So it leaves the crankcase right here, travels down into this little guy, and Caterpillar, what they did is they put a filter here to trap the greasy concoction and allow just the cleaner air to go by. And that cleaner crankcase air goes into the intake side of the turbo through the air filter. All right, so there's a few problems with that. One, this creates back pressure. So when you're trying to push pressurized air out of the engine and it hits a filter, that's more restrictive, obviously. So that creates more pressure on the crankcase side. Well, the more pressure you have inside the engine, the more you're going to get leaks. Now, this engine only has about 500 hours on it. I don't really see any major leaks, but I'm sure it has a few. So inside the engine, all that pressure is going to try to find its way out, and it's going to, bust through seals and other places. So that's why it develops oil leaks. On an aspirated engine, you would just take the bypass blow-by hose into the intake manifold because there's vacuum there. You can't do that on a turbo system because on the intake side, this aftercooler, if you plumb the crankcase hose to this and then it goes into the engine, well, then you're on the pressure side because the turbo is pressurizing the air that's flowing through the aftercooler here. And you can't do that because you'll just pressurize the crankcase even further. So on trucks, this hose here just goes down to the ground, usually. More modern engines, I think after 2007 or something, they developed different methods for dealing with the blow-by. Caterpillar does the filter, and that has been a problem because not only does it create back pressure and therefore leaks, but that sooty mess also goes into the turbo, and the turbo hates a sooty mass of air. The turbo spins at up to 100,000 RPM, so even a droplet of oil on one of those fins can cause it to have some problems. So this has really got to be clean air. That's why you have an air filter, right? So it works against you having this system here. The engine would run better if this was just evacuated, into the air outside the boat, but you can't do that. So they want to try to clean it up. So other engines will pipe this into the exhaust side of the engine, which is probably the best way to do it. Yeah, so even though these engines only have about 500 hours on them, you can see that some neglect has occurred. In this case here, this is a troubling thing. Corrosion's always a good sign of bad things. I guess it's a good clue. Anyway, here's the fuel and transfer pump on the lower side of the engine, front of the engine. This is the starboard engine. And then here is your big impeller pump right here. And there's your weep hole, basically. I don't see any problems there, but obviously it has been dripping down onto the transfer pump, and it has caused some corrosion here. I don't think it's an issue, but down the road it could be. So checking for water in the oil, that's, you can always pull the dipstick and take a look at that for a milky white or chocolate color to it. You can also pull the oil fill cap and just peer inside the oil fill tube here. And I don't want to put my finger in there, but that looks pretty clean. If you had water in the oil, you would get condensation up into this tube here, and you would see rust on the inside of it. So that's always an interesting thing to take a look at. And these should be nice and tight. They expand. If these pop off underway, you'll get an oil spill. Yeah, for some reason, they elected to go with a single oil filter. Usually on these engines, I think you find 2 oil filters. But here's this one big one. And of course, you want to use a cat oil filter. They're much better. Here is on this side, the port engine. You can see the oil filters right here. And you can see the second option for an oil filter, which is right next to it here, has been capped off. Here's the fuel filter. This is the cat fuel filter here. This is the secondary one on the engine. And this device is what you use to prime the fuel in case you check or change the fuel. Now on these engines, you don't want to add fuel to the filter unless it's filtered. So you run it through a nylon stocking or something like that to filter out the fuel before you put it in there, because that's supposed to be pristine, right? So anyway, that's how you pump it up. So here's the reservoir tank, and not the reservoir, but the expansion tank. The reservoir is over there on the wall, and you can see where the low and high is for this engine, and you get all that extra right there when it heats up. Right, so check the cap, check the condition of the fluid, which has just been changed. Here's the heat exchanger underneath. Here, the red bolts here are the zincs or anodes, and there's about a dozen of them around the engine. They all have to be changed regularly, or you could cause a lot of harm to this engine. So the water is coming from the impeller over here. So the impeller's on the other side of the engine. It's coming through this hose into the aftercooler. So this is basically cold water going into the aftercooler. And the aftercooler makes a circuit of raw water and comes back out again here, and then goes into the heat exchanger. So the purpose of the aftercooler is to cool the air that is being pumped into the engine via the turbo. So the turbo is over there, and it's turning and pressurizing air. Anytime you pressurize air, you're going to cause it to warm up a bit. So here's the turbocharger, and you can see the exhaust side on this side, and the clean air side is on that side. In between you have a seal, 2 turbines. So this turbine here is pushing what was cold air from the outside world. There's the air intake right there, or engine room temperature air. And then it's pushing it through this line into the aftercooler. They call it an aftercooler because it's after the turbo, right? Intercooler would be between 2 turbos. That's the difference. Caterpillar calls it a CAC, or a CAC, a charge air cooler, I think is what it's called. Anyway, it works same principle. And then so the cooled air or warm air going into here, and I'll take a temperature reading of that to see how warm it actually is. It goes into this device here, and you can see the fins on top, and that air is cooled by the raw water that's circulating in here, straight from the ocean. And then it goes directly from this hose here into the cylinders. That's your intake manifold underneath it. And so that's what the purpose of that is. Now on the exhaust side, you got this system here. This is the hot area. This is the exhaust manifold here, essentially. And it's coming up to this big loop up top here. And then here is where the seawater drops into it. All right, so the seawater is then spraying into the exhaust right around here. and then that goes into the muffler system. Now when you get to these larger engines, you have some more little tricks. Of course, this engine has sensors all over the place. I mean, all over the place you'll find sensors for all kinds of things. So if you have an electronic control unit and you have a panel that can give you the check engine light, doing a couple of things, you can cause that light to flash a code. And from that code, you can tell what the problem is, or what the sensors are giving you as a warning. So that's pretty good. This engine doesn't have that. That I know. Here's the, well, maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is prior to that time. So here's a control unit, but I don't think it has that sort of capability. I might be wrong. Anyway, what it does have the gauges up here. So, and it has a start switch, stop, and it has engine hours. So you can do some diagnostics with this engine. So right here you have your fuel pressure, which is very important to know. The engine's not going to start unless you have good fuel pressure. So as the engine turns over, this needle should go up to about somewhere 40 to 70 pounds. Temperature, voltage output, I believe that's what it is. And then here you have oil pressure. So that should be, 30 to 60 pounds or something like that. So that's all good to be able to see right here. And you can diagnose the engine while you're down here doing that. Very handy. All right, this right here is your return line manifold. So you have these two hose connections here, these two lines. They go to either tank, port tank, starboard tank, and that line just drops into the top of the tank and dumps fuel back into the tank. This is your return manifold here, so that just fills up with returning fuel from the engine. You have a line here that goes to the port engine. That line goes to the starboard, and that line goes, to the generator. These coming from, actually, so coming from the port, coming from the starboard, coming from the generator. And they're all open, of course. That's the way they should be. Now the problem here is this is offset to the starboard side of the boat. So the fuel return is going to favor the side with the least resistance. So in this particular system here, as I can imagine it, you're going to get more fuel returning to the starboard engine than you will the port engine, simply because there's less resistance. It's a shorter run to the starboard tank, which is just right over here. So if that's the case, you're going to be returning some percentage more fuel that way. If that's the case, you're going to send fuel out of your vent, overfill the tank, that kind of thing. So in order to avoid this, you have to have some kind of transfer line between the two tanks that stays open. And I haven't found that yet, so I'll look for it. All right, getting ready for our sea trial. Let's not waste any time. We're cast off and underway. There you go, bow and stern thrusters, can't beat that. Hi little doggies. Alright, so far, not getting the AIS appearing on that. Autopilot has skipped a few beats, so we can't hold autopilot for very long. Won't hold course, so something's wrong there. This whole helm station here is loose. It's not good. Other things are still being installed. So I'll go back and try the autopilot again here momentarily. Yeah, coming out of a major refit, a lot of hands on this boat, a lot of parts, people going on and off, leaving things not quite done. Nav lights don't work. Yeah, so quite a few things left to do. Okay, we're just outside Ventura. Beam to sea, as you can see the stabilizer working there pretty well. See these guys moving back and forth. Boat is a little more stable now than it was earlier, so that's good. It's working. Autopilot seems to be working. Hasn't hiccuped yet in the last few minutes. Alright, coming back into Ventura. Everything seemed to function okay. Autopilot started working. No hiccups for the last half an hour or so. It went off course 3 times and gave an alarm, but since then it's been okay. So we'll see. Sometimes you just don't know. Anyway, it's an old boat, a little neglected, underused. It's paid a price for that, but otherwise it's in very decent mechanical shape.